Hi, I'm Erin McInespy, and I'm here at Boarding House Park with Lowell High graduate class of 2009, Jordan Gys. Okay, so our goal is to spread awareness and hopefully prevent someone at Lowell High from making a bad choice that could affect their future. Would you mind sharing your story with us?
Yeah, of course. So my story is one of a kid at Lowell High myself, and during my time at Lowell High, my brother started progressing from drinking and smoking marijuana to using Percocets and Vicodin. Started off by taking them orally, and then it progressed to him snorting them with his friends. And back then, I mean, it wasn't too long ago, but back then, nobody had any idea what they were getting themselves into. They actually would start to get sick, and they didn't realize they were experiencing physical withdrawals from the Percocets and the Vicodins or whatever type of pain medication they get their hands on. And they thought they were actually had a virus or something. They didn't realize they were dope sick, and it happened very quickly for them, as it did with a lot of kids. One of them would get hurt, injured, playing sports, and then they would get prescribed Percocets, Vicodin, so be it. Back then, especially even now today, overprescribed substantially, and they would all go over their friend's house and they'd all do it together and have a couple beers with it, and it'd get messed up, and they didn't realize that, what it would lead to. They thought everyone was doing it, so it can't be too harmful. My doctor prescribed me it. Can't be too harmful, but they were wrong. Some of those kids my brother hung out with aren't even with us here today. They've passed away. They've succumbed to their addiction. Others are in recovery. Others are still using. It's taken out a whole generation. I don't think folks understand how difficult it is to kick heroin. It's one of the most difficult things to do in the entire world.
As a person who loves someone who has been addicted, how did it affect you and your family?
Well, having my brother be an addict and living with him for the onset of his addiction, eventually he was kicked out of the house. We had to stop enable him. But in the beginning, as I told you, I didn't know what it was getting into. My parents didn't have the slightest idea as to the road he was going down. Yeah, we had no idea. And then it started progressing. Things in the house started going missing. And eventually I came clean to my parents and told them that, Corey's using. And they had started to see the signs, and then the Percocets and the Vicodin weren't enough. He started using heroin, and then he would steal anything that wasn't nailed to the floor, essentially. So he did get kicked out of the house, but even then, I enabled him big time. He'd come back on cold nights, and I'd put a futon mattress out in the shed so he could sleep in it. I'd bring him out food. I actually went down to Rite Aid, and I got him a bunch of clean needles because I didn't want him catching some sort of transmittable disease. I mean, I enabled him because I loved him, and I thought that I was helping him, but in the end, I wasn't. I was hurting him. The toughest but best decision I ever made was to cut my brother off and give him tough love. I'd still talk to him, but anytime he'd ask me, can I have $20, $30? Can you get me this? Can you get me that? Can you, let me sleep in the shed? I said no, and for addicts, all they think about is getting high, and they're not going to stop thinking about that until they hit rock bottom. You can't get better until you hit rock bottom, until you realize that there's nothing else left. There's no one else left that's going to bail you out.
What was the reality of living with someone who was an addict?
So a lot of it, as I said, it happened fast, but 3 or 4 months when my brother started declining big time, I didn't see it physically until I looked at a picture of us from a family party, and then I looked at him. I looked up at him. I looked at the picture. I looked up at him, and he looked like a completely different person. He had bags under his eyes. The track marks were starting to come in on his arms. He had drastic weight loss. He looked like a zombie. He looked like he was dying, and in reality, he was. He was slowly dying. My cousin Zachary was another addict. He unfortunately has passed away of an opiate overdose a couple years back. He developed a severe abscess. What an abscess is an infection you get from using heroin needles, and it started eating away at the flesh on his arm, and he looked like he had some sort of flesh-eating virus, but he didn't. It was from using. People don't realize the road they're going down. The other thing was, I'd go out with my brother. Sometimes we go to the gas station. There's always the threat of violence, because when you're an addict, you steal from everyone, including drug dealers. There was always the threat that I could get caught in the crossfire, or someone would come and hurt him, and I can't sit there and watch my brother get beat up, and then I get dragged into it. And this happened in Lowell. And there was a couple times where we're at a gas station. I was going to get out of the car, and he'd lock the doors and take off. And I'd say, what's going on? I didn't really know. And he'd tell me, that guy doesn't like me. And looking back on it, I know now the reason why it probably was after my brother is because he owed him money, or he stole from him. So there was a time where they, him and my other cousin Nicholas had taken my father's safe, and my father had a decent amount of money in the safe because he was going to buy stock for a job tomorrow. He's a contractor, and they had taken $3,000 out of it and actually returned the safe. There was more money and there was jewelry in there, and we would put everything in the safe that was valuable because it never thought my brother would take the whole thing. Unfortunately, he did, and they brought it back with the rest of the stuff in it, and that $3,000 that they took was gone in 2 days. 2 days, and from what I heard looking back on it from stories my brothers told me is they both had a couple close calls of overdoses over those 2 days.
Can you tell us the progression of your brother's addiction?
So, as I said, it happened very, very fast, and they didn't know what they were getting into. I mean, my brother started drinking and smoking weed, and he did that consistently for a couple years, and, back then, and even today, there's still kids that think everyone does that, and be that as may, some people can develop a problem from it. My brother did. It led to the Percocets, and then I'd say timeline-wise, once he started using Percocets and Vicodin and whatever type of prescription painkiller he could get his hand on, he went from taking them orally. Probably a month or two later, he was putting them up his nose, and then they started smoking them a couple months down the road. And then, after a while of that, I'd say within a year, he went from popping pills to shooting up heroin. So it progressed very fast. And, the thing is, he went in and out of rehab probably, I'd say, I lost count, but if I had to put a number on it, I'd say 20 different times. Detox, rehab. And we'd always enable him as soon as he came out, and we spent a ton of money on this. Everything he worked hard for. He worked for my father roofing. He's progressing towards being a foreman. He made a lot of money. All of it gone. Not a cent did he save. He spent it as fast as it was coming in. Sometimes faster. My father would loan him money ahead of time, but yeah, everything he worked hard for, he lost to addiction, into drugs. He was the definition of a stoner when we were in high school, and it ended up progressing. So I guess for some cases you could say marijuana is a gateway drug. Yeah.
When you went to Lowell High, were there any resources available for you to get advice from?
As I said, there was very little known about it back then. As far as I know, there was no resources. I mean, I'm sure I could have walked into a guidance counselor's office, but I mean, I had some of my good friends that had older brothers that were addicts, and I never even spoke about it with them. There was a stigma that there still kind of is, that people are ashamed. No one wants to talk about their brother that's a dope addict. I think a great idea would be some sort of support group at Lowell High for loved ones of addicts, whether you got a brother, a sister, an uncle, a mother, or father that's an addict. It's very difficult to be someone who loves an addict just as much as it is to be an addict, and I think there's a lack of support there. And I'd like to see that change big time.
Is there anything that they could have said or done to, promote the fact that you could have talked about it?
Yeah, if somebody could have told me that I have nothing to be ashamed of, I mean, deep down I knew it, but I was kind of embarrassed. I mean, my friends would ask, my brother would go into rehab, my friends would ask how he's doing, and just be one-word answers. I'd say, good, he's fine. I wouldn't want to talk about it. I'd make that very clear to people, mostly because of the embarrassment, because of the stigma, Especially in these days of social media, you see people say some pretty horrible things about addicts. But I can tell you that if they experienced the pain and the tragedy that I have, that they will not say those things. So yeah, if I could have found somebody that could have related to my story, I think it would have been very good for me. I think drug counselors, the best drug counselors, are former addicts. I think those are the type of people we need to be looking at getting into schools, not just to prevent addiction, but to talk to folks who have loved ones that are addicts. Because it certainly affected my grades. It affected my outlook on life, my outlook on my future, everything. Every phone call I got during the day, at night, I'd think, is this the call I'm going to get about my brother being dead? It was awful. It affected me just as much as it affected my parents. I'm going to put my parents through hell, put us through hell. Thankfully, a lot of that's behind us, but it can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter, rich, poor, black, white. Doesn't matter. It can happen to literally anybody.
Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently?
So I've thought about this a lot. Obviously, having lost my cousin Zachary to an opiate overdose and having experienced my brother have to rebuild his entire life. And the first thing I would have done is when I saw my brother and his friends using, back then I thought I would have been a tattletale, but I would have went and told my parents. I would have told anyone who would have listened. And I would have told him what was going to happen, how he was going to slowly kill himself, how he was going to have to rebuild his entire life and start all over, what it was going to do to his family, the pain it was going to put him through, the money it was going to cost him, the years off his life it was going to cost him. I'm sick of going to funerals. I'm sick of going to wakes. I'm sick of burying my friends. I'm sick of burying family members. Something's got to give here. People need to wake up, and we need to realize that it's a very slippery slope. You think you can take that one pill on the Saturday, take a Percocet, and then go to the keg party, have a couple beers. That's how it starts, and then it progresses out of control, and the next thing you know, you're putting a needle in your arm, and you're destroying your life. So don't do it. That's all I have to say.